Well, it's been an interesting day and a half so far in terms of these discussions, and my job in terms of providing some closing comments, I think, is really to do a bit of a stream of consciousness, if you will, for what I've heard and what I've learned, and hopefully this will reflect some of the things that you've heard as well. I think Dr. Patel set the bar high as he talked about our hopes, if you will, for metabolomics and the exposome by talking about the idea of enabling comprehensive assessments and data-driven discovery and implications for health policy and decision-making. And I guess from my standpoint, I asked myself, am I discouraged with what I heard? And the answer to that is no. Am I encouraged? Guardedly so. I think that the idea that we have some opportunities here continues to resonate very well with the kinds of things that we've heard. I think our federal representatives from NIEHS and from EPA have indicated that these topics that we've talked about are in their strategic thinking. They're the kinds of things that will, in their view, allow us to transform exposure science, and I think from a scientific community, that's where we're looking to go. They're cognizant and very interested in the idea of combined exposures. And from a toxicologic standpoint, I think we have grappled with that for so many years that there has been a real push, both in toxicology and risk assessment, to say, how do we get our arms around these kinds of questions of combined exposures and multiple factors contributing to risk? So that leads me, I guess, to be encouraged that some of the things that we talked about this morning in terms of the opportunities for a clearinghouse of data or improved and expanded technologies are on the horizon. They're things that both the community and perhaps some of the funding community is interested in. The improved and expanded technologies and methods, I'm encouraged because of some of the parallels with the Human Genome Project and the various types of omics advances that we have made in other areas in the last decade or decade and a half. And so I think that that also bodes well for the kind of work that we might do here. Steve gave us a really nice introduction to the topic and the progression that we've seen just within the last few years in this particular area. That also suggests to me that we're moving in the right direction, and while we are perhaps grappling with some of the real difficulties as you look hard at a problem, there are potential solutions out there, and certainly I think David Wishart gave us an optimistic view that with the right type of information and with the right type of approaches, we can actually bring the metabolome into this discussion about total lifetime exposures with the right kind of data and information. I think there have been a number of discussions that moved from the conceptual, if you will, into the technology and the details that come with doing good chemistry. And for the biologists and risk assessors and others in the audience, this was also sobering but encouraging in terms of the ability to apply what we've done in terms of analytical chemistry for decades now to this problem of very complex exposures and lots of unknown unknowns that need to be dealt with. So the kinds of things that Aaron and Anthony talked about in terms of emerging technologies, I had to laugh a little bit. I asked Anthony after the discussion whether or not he sort of looked ahead and what was on the horizon in terms of technologies that might help us with detection and so on. And the response was that his company doesn't talk to him about that. So I guess the point there is that everyone is looking to see how we can do these things better, and where the technologies that we heard about today will continue to advance to address the kinds of issues that we've identified. That having been said, I think we heard encouragement from Susan Sumner talking a little bit about perhaps the cord blood exposome example, where the metabotype actually did show differences for endogenous compounds when environmental exposures were present. And so that idea that we're beginning to see some of these kinds of examples, and Dean mentioned another one for us, where with the atrazine example, one could begin to actually tease those kinds of things out, was tempered a bit by discussions around the challenges associated with doing longitudinal studies to make sure that we got the samples at the right time, or that we were looking at longer term patterns in terms of the metabolome. I think rightful challenge that Andrew Patterson put out with regard to the individuality of metabolomes, and the fact that that's something that we're still going to have to really think about in terms of how we get at the commonalities as well as recognizing the differences. And certainly as we got into the discussions, I think this whole issue of a set of reference chemicals or a reference metabolome is something that needs further discussion, because I think my own view was, to a certain extent, we were talking past each other in terms of what that actually meant. And so I would suggest that if there was an opportunity for some follow-up, it would be follow-up in terms of what does that set of reference materials look like, whatever those might be. I think Oliver and Peter, while I am not an analytical chemist, really gave me encouragement that the kinds of things that they're doing and the ability to really understand these chemicals from the standpoint of the use of multiple platforms, the ability to deconvolute peaks, to do fragment analysis, to really begin to look at these things carefully, and then to understand the network of these chemicals and how that network affects or potentially could affect overall outcomes is something that was very good. And of course, the databases that they use and have built around this will be extremely important on the issue of data sharing that we talked about yesterday, and the fact that that will be critical if we're going to make real progress and not simply have a series of one-off examples. I think a point that David Wishart has made on a number of occasions, that this needs to be a big data problem that is solved with a large top-down effort. Chirag started us off this morning by talking about this as studying the elusive environment of large scale. And I think that really does capture this idea of where we're trying to go with this. And Dr. Vermeulen's talk really sort of brought us from the example that we looked at yesterday that was focused primarily on hints, if not indicators, of a relationship of etiology to disease from metabolomic analysis, back to this idea of really focusing on the life course of epidemiology and the ability to begin to link through metabolomics and other opportunities the exposure to various types of outcomes, and as he said, get closer to the functional endpoints that we're interested in. He showed us a positive example with benzene and a negative example with TCDD that suggests that obviously we still have work to do, and that is not a surprise. I think the discussion of the challenges that he provided suggested to me that the kind of work that we've talked about and really just touched on briefly in the day and a half here has lots of more, say, interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary discussion needed, and that this final discussion about the chemists and the toxicologists and the epidemiologists getting together, I think, points that out as well, that this is a big data problem that's going to require multidisciplinary types of approaches. I think the idea that we're looking to do science that can enable action. I think this was a theme that Elaine started with in terms of the work that EPA does with its research and development program, is something that really should allow us to continue to support these efforts. The kind of work that we're talking about goes all the way from the discussion that we just had about, are we looking at public health prevention, or are we talking about trying to improve risk assessment by dealing with these kinds of studies? And we didn't talk about it in our questions, although one was on the board, but how does this allow us to talk to individual citizens, the public, about their risk, their well-being, given their metabolome and potential for environmental exposures. So I guess just to sort of pull this together, I remain encouraged by this discussion today. I think there's plenty of opportunity for additional workshops on the topic. Maybe there will be a workshop 4 associated with this particular committee that looks at these emerging science issues for environmental health decisions. But I think that, echoing something that Steve said, we've begun to make contributions by having these kinds of discussions with the kinds of audiences that we can bring together in these workshops. I am pleased that we have as many people staying through the end of the discussion here, and I know we have many, many more on the phone, and I'm looking forward to additional follow-up that will come out of this particular workshop. So thanks for listening to the ramblings, and I'm happy to have a question or a comment after the session is closed up if anybody wants to talk. Thanks. Marilee, do you want to close things off? Or?
Stand up on the floor. Thanks everyone for coming and for participating on the web as well. Thanks very much to the speakers and to the members of the committee who spent so much time planning this workshop. As we noted earlier on, this meeting is webcast. It will be available and archived in webcast on YouTube within about a week. And presentations will be available unless the speakers have asked particular slides not to be included. And as well, we'll be working on a summary document to capture the highlights of this workshop, and that will be available sometime more than a month. So then for the government liaisons and committee members, we are going to be moving to room 120, which is next door to where your breakfast and lunch were. And we invite the speakers and panelists also to join us for lunch. And then we'll be having the committee and liaison meeting where we'll be talking mostly about the two upcoming topics that the committee has planned, one which is individual variability and the second which is a microbiome meeting. And the dates of those upcoming meetings for anyone who would like to mark their calendars are inter-individual variability, which is going to be September 30th and October 1st, and getting the most from microbiome research in the next decade, what functions to study. That meeting will be on January 14th and 15th. So thank you very much, everyone.